Hola amigos, Ghost here, and today we continue our bonus Bookends series on Ghost of Tsushima. In today's Bookends, we shall discuss the first Mongol invasion of Japan, followed by the 8-year intermission from war, and finally, the second Mongol invasion of Japan. With that, let us return to the past. Let's do this! Our story continues in the first days of November 1274. After Kublai Khan's diplomatic efforts with the Japanese failed to bring them into the empire peacefully, the only course left was war. The Mongol invasion began on November 2nd, 1274, as the Khan's forces of 900 ships, 7,000 sailors, and 23,000 soldiers set sail from Korea toward Japan. The vastly smaller fleet of the Japanese could do nothing but inform their comrades of the coming danger. The Japanese were forced to wait for the invasion to reach their shores. They would not have to wait long. The islands of Tsushima, Kamino in the north, and Shimano in the south, and divided by a tiny strait, are located midway between Korea and Japan. Thus, any invasion from Korea had to go through Tsushima, and that's exactly what the Mongols did. In the early morning of November 4th, 1274, the Mongol invasion reached Tsushima. Spotting the approaching invasion, the Jito-dai/deputy governor So Sokikune of the So clan gathered his forces for battle. The Japanese force of 80 samurai and their retinue would soon face invaders that numbered in the thousands. The invaders would land at Komoda Beach in the northwestern tip of Shimano at 2 in the morning. Sukikune responded by sending representatives to negotiate with the Mongols. Why he did this is unknown. Maybe it was to buy time for his forces. Maybe it was to save the lives of Tsushima from bloodshed. Regardless of intentions, the representatives were driven off by arrows. The time for diplomacy was over. The battle for Tsushima began at 4 in the morning. The Japanese fought bravely, but the Mongol superior numbers were too much. Sukikune would lead a final cavalry charge to end the battle. None would survive. The Mongols were victorious, but at a cost, or as the Japanese of the time claimed. One story has a samurai named Tsukisada slaying 25 invaders in single combat before falling himself. Nevertheless, with the Mongols' victory came several days of pillaging and killing of any resistance to their control. Unlike Ghost of Tsushima, there was no ghost to save Tsushima from this fate. The Mongol invasion would leave Tsushima a devastated land as they departed on the 13th of November to their next destination, Iki Island. The island of Iki is located midway between Tsushima and Kyushu. Thus, it was the next logical target of the invasion. Unlike Ghost of Tsushima, Iki was not a lawless land of pirates. Instead, it was ruled by samurai and its deputy governor, Taira no Kagitaka. Kagitaka was the last of the Taira. His family survived the Genpei War, and since then served as a loyal retainer of the Shoni clan and the Kamakura shogunate, despite the bad blood of the past. Kagitaka was prepared to die fighting for Japan. Roughly in the early hours of November 14th, the invaders landed on Iki. Once more, the invaders outnumbered the Japanese greatly. Kagitaka led his 100 samurai and the retinue in an attack on the invaders' beachhead, inflicting many casualties, before retreating into Iki's Hinosume castle. The castle was besieged. Kagitaka prepared for a final assault that would cover his messengers escaping to the mainland. Kagitaka's daughter and a loyal samurai named Sozaburo used a secret passage to reach a ship next to the shore. As they boarded the vessel, the Mongols spotted them and fired volleys of arrows at them. Kagitaka's daughter was killed, But So Saburo survived. At this very moment, Kagetaka launched his final assault. The 36-man charge was repelled, leaving only 6 men alive, but it was the opening needed for the ship to escape Iki, and Sozuburo to deliver the news of Iki's fall. Kagetaka and his family would commit seppuku. The castle would fall, and with it, Iki. Iki would be plundered by the Mongols before the invasion departed its shores, heading to their final destination, Kyushu's Hakata Bay. Kyushu, Japan's third largest island, is the most southwestern of the main islands and the closest to Korea. Thus, it was the main target of the Mongol invasion. In the northern coast of Kyushu lies Hakata Bay, and the islands of Noko no Shima and Shika no Shima. This bay was within eyesight from Iki, and it could provide an ideal jumping-off point to invade Kyushu. On November 19th, 1274, the Mongol invasion arrived in Hakata Bay, occupying Noko and Shika Islands, which flanked the bay's entrance. The next day would bring about the first battle of Hakata Bay, or the Battle of Bun'ei. The Japanese numbered 4,000 to 6,000 warriors, while the invaders outnumbered them 2 to 1. The battle began with the invaders landing on the beaches between the towns of Sawara and Hakata, and quickly forming a beachhead by capturing these towns and the high ground between them. The Japanese readied themselves to engage the Mongols. A grandson of one of the Japanese generals fired an arrow toward the invaders' ranks, announcing by Japanese custom the true beginning of the battle. The Mongols laughed in response to this custom. With the high ground, the invaders' commanding general Lu Fuxiong was easily able to control the movements of his forces, issuing orders with war drums, flags, and other methods foreign to the Japanese. The Mongols organized their infantry into densely packed and shielded pike formations, with archers and crossbowmen covering the flanks and rear. A small force of armored cavalry were held in reserve. Gone were the days of the Mongols' mass horse archer armies. The Japanese, on the other hand, organized themselves into their favored formation of individually mounted samurai skilled in horse archery, surrounded by a small number of protective infantry armed with curved polearms. A small force of archers using large shields as stationary walls were positioned among the samurai. It was clear that the Japanese were inexperienced with non-Japanese warfare. The only advantage the Japanese could rely on was their iron-plated and leather armor that most of them wore, while only the Mongol cavalry had such protection. Despite the Mongols' numbers, weapons, and formations, the Japanese stood firm for battle. The Mongols began their advance with their disciplined infantry marching into the rough terrain between them and the Japanese. Their archers fired volleys of arrows into the ranks of the Japanese. The crossbowmen would join the onslaught once they were in range. The Japanese endured this storm of arrows. Advancing closer, the Mongols employed paper and iron-cased bombs at their enemy. The bombs' explosions frightened off many samurai's horses. Some explosions blinded and or deafened men. With the Mongols closing the distance, individual samurai rushed forward, picking out their own targets. These samurai called out individuals for single combat, introducing themselves and their accomplishments before attempting to engage their targets. This rarely worked that day, as the Mongols held their formation, killing any Japanese that approached them. The battle could have turned into a massacre, but fortune favored that the rough terrain which separated the two armies would turn it into a fierce and chaotic mess. For the Mongols, whole sections of their army were dispersed into small groups that were dangerously isolated and picked off by the Japanese. For the Japanese, the mud that covered much of the field of battle caused many of their horses to get stuck, becoming easy prey for Mongol arrows. This shift of the battle would make the battle a brief one, lasting only that day. Thanks to historical conservationism, a set of illustrated hand scrolls commissioned after the invasions by the low-ranking samurai Takizaki Tsunaga, which depicts his experience during the invasions, survives to this day. The Moko Shirai Ikotaba's first scroll covers Tsunaga's experience of the Battle of Bun'ei. As the Mongols drew closer, Shoni Kagisuke, Tsunaga's lord, ordered for his samurai to wait for the Mongols to get bogged down in the rough terrain before they would strike. Being impatient, Tsunaga ignored his lord's orders, shouting, "Waiting for the general will cause us to be late to the battle. Of all the warriors of the clan, I, Tsunaga, will be the first to fight from Higo before charging forward to face the invaders." Bypassing the Mongols' largest intact formation, Tsunaga encountered fellow samurai Kikuchi Takifusa, driving off a small group of Mongols, killing 2 in the process. Seeking glory, Tsunaga and his retinue charged at this routed enemy, but the field's mud caught their feet and hooves, leaving them sitting ducks to Mongol arrows, a volley of which struck them, wounding or killing most of Tsunaga's group. Only Tsunaga and 3 of his men survived the onslaught. The routed Mongols regained their composure and countercharged the survivors. Luckily, another samurai, Shiroshi Michiyasu, countercharged the Mongols, forcing them to retreat once more and saving Tsunaga and his men's lives. Little glory was won, but Tsunaga survived these events and would take part in the defense against the second invasion. By nightfall, the Mongols secured victory over their beachhead, driving the Japanese into retreat. The town of Hakata and the nearby Hakazaki Shrine would be burned down by the Mongols. Both sides suffered heavy losses in the day's fighting. The routed Japanese prepared for a final stand at the Mizuki Castle, which blocked the way to Dazafu. However, no attack would ever befall the Japanese at Mizuki. Fate had other plans. During the Japanese's retreat, Shoni Kagisuke managed to fire an arrow into the face of General Liu, severely wounding him. Forced to retire to his ship, Liu convened with his officers to plan the next steps of the invasion. One officer wanted to keep up the pressure through the night, before expected Japanese reinforcements could arrive. The other officer wanted to rest their forces, as their unfamiliarity with the terrain could cost them dearly if the Japanese launched night attacks. Liu sided with the latter and recalled the invasion force to the fleet for rest and resupply. Liu's fate is unknown, but it is likely that he did not survive the night. He would not live to see what his decision would ultimately spell for the invasion. The invasion fleet would withdraw outside of the bay after midnight. This decision sealed the invasion's fate. According to some accounts, a sudden reversal of wind and the start of a great storm would sink dozens upon dozens of ships, taking their crews and soldier passengers with them. Others believe that this occurred after the fleet had decided to return to Korea. Regardless of what truly happened, by the morning of November 20th, the Mongol invasion was gone. Japan survived to fight another day. The invaders were said to have lost up to 200 ships, and of the 30,000-strong invasion force, roughly 13,000 would never return to Korea. The Japanese lost over a third of their forces that took part in the battles of the invasion, up to 3,000 in all. Countless more people of Iki, Tsushima, and Kyushu died due to the cruelty of the Mongols, starvation, and other end results of the invasion. In the end, the first Mongol invasion of Japan ended in a stalemate. Kublai Khan would return to diplomacy, believing that the Japanese would fold to his demands after the clear success of his invasion's victories in battle, despite its rough and stormy conclusion. He couldn't be more wrong. In 1275, the Khan sent a diplomatic mission to Japan demanding tribute. The shogunal regent Hojo Tokimune responded to this mission by seizing the ambassadors, sending them to Kamakura, and beheading them. The graves of the envoys still exist to this day at Joryuji in Fujisawa, Japan, several miles west of Kamakura. Once more, the Khan refused to give up on diplomacy and sent a second mission in 1279. These messengers would share a similar fate as the first mission. The envoys would be beheaded in Hakata. This was the final straw for the Khan. Only complete conquest would bring Japan into the empire, and with the final defeat of the Song dynasty in southern China in 1279 as well, nothing stood in the Khan's way in unleashing his empire's full might against Japan. Once more, the Japanese were not idle during the Khan's second round of diplomacy. The shogunate was well aware a second invasion was all but guaranteed. Thus, they made great efforts in their preparations for it. The samurai of Kyushu were better organized against Mongol battle tactics. New forts and castles were constructed near many potential landing points in Kyushu and western Honshu, including Hakata Bay. Large numbers of stakes were placed along the beaches and river mouths on the mainland to block potential avenues of invasion. Double the samurai, the retainers, and local levies were raised than the previous defense to counter the invasion when the time came. Battle plans were prepared to use small boats to harass the Mongol fleet during the initial landings and for the nights after. The islands of Tsushima and Iki, despite still recovering from the Mongols' brief occupation several years ago, rallied their forces, including new reinforcements from the mainland, to defend the islands as best they can, and if needed, to the last man. Finally, the most important preparation made was the construction of a large stone wall that surrounded Hakata Bay. By 1276, the wall was fully built. It stood 2 meters high and 12 miles long. At some points, it rose up to 9 feet tall. Along its length were defensive towers and gates. The inner wall was sheer sloped, making it difficult for invaders to scale, while the outer wall was sloped for horse archers to use with ease. The stone wall was so well built that parts of it still remain to this day. All of this preparation would come at a great cost to the shogunate's treasury. Regardless, when the second invasion would come, Japan would be ready. Kublai Khan began to plan out and prepare his second invasion in 1280. With the Song conquered, the empire could gather an invasion force several times larger than the first and use such a force to launch a two-pronged invasion. One army would attack Japan the same way as the first invasion, and one would attack Kyushu from the west. The vast resources of the empire were used to build a fleet that dwarfed the first, with estimations of between 1,500 to 4,000 ships being built or requisitioned. At least 600 of these ships were captured from the Song. Upwards of 140,000 soldiers were gathered for the invasion, which consisted of Mongols, Han Chinese, Jurchen, Korean, and many others. Such massive numbers are clearly exaggerated by the parties that reported them during and after the invasions, but nevertheless, the lowest estimation leaves the second Mongol invasion force at 60,000 strong. Regardless of the numbers, the second Mongol invasion was ready to conquer Japan. The second Mongol invasion of Japan began on the 22nd of May, 1281, as the 40,000-strong Eastern Army stationed in Korea set sail toward the islands of Tsushima and Iki. From the onset, the invasion suffered from logistical difficulties, weather, and disease. Supplying such a massive force proved difficult, which resulted in a piecemeal invasion with groups of ships departing over a stretch of weeks. This was extremely the case for the 100,000-strong Western Army stationed in China, as its part of the fleet faced delay after delay. What made this worse was the fact that the invasion's supreme commander, Mongol General Arakan, was with the Western Army. The weather of the sea slowed the invasion down considerably, as well as hinted at the future of the invasion's fate. The tightly packed ships of both armies led straight into the ripe conditions for disease to spread among the men. Disease would kill many and prevent many more from participating in the battles to come. It would take the invasion force until the second week of June to reach their first target, the island of Tsushima. On June 9th, 1281, the second Mongol invasion reached Tsushima. The samurai commander, Ryuzoji Sutoki, led the defenders against the Mongols. Sutoki, warriors of the So clan, and other samurai fought and died for the island. So fierce was their resistance that the Mongols left Tsushima mostly unpillaged before departing for Iki Island. Though there was no ghost like before, this time Tsushima survived the invasion. Its people and the So clan would recover from these dark days. On June 14th, the invasion reached Iki. The 19-year-old samurai commander, Shone Tsukitoki, bravely led the defense of the island. Tsukitoki inspired the people to fight the invaders. Their resistance was fierce, but in the end, Tsukitoki and his men would die fighting and Iki would fall once more. For a week, the eastern force encamped on Iki, looting the island while they waited for their western force to arrive. But continued delays made it so that the western force wouldn't arrive until the first days of July. Refusing to wait this long, the eastern force departed Iki between the 21st and 22nd of June for their final destination, Japan. As the Mongol invasion approached Japan, the eastern force split in two equal groups and launched simultaneous attacks on Hakata Bay and the Nagato province of Honshu, the largest island of Japan. Roughly 300 ships and 20,000 soldiers attacked the coastal town of Nagato province on June 23rd, but were quickly driven off by the 25th. This force retreated to Iki before eventually regrouping with the rest of the invasion. The other half of the eastern force began their attack on Hakata Bay on the 23rd of June. The second battle of Hakata Bay, or the Battle of Koan, had begun. The Mongols came ashore on the islands of Noko and Shika, occupying them once more. With their flanks secure, the invaders landed on the beaches around the rebuilt town of Hakata. Those that came ashore faced heavy resistance by the Japanese behind their stone wall. Unable to scale the wall and receiving volley after volley of arrows, the invaders were driven offshore, unable to recreate their beachhead of the first invasion. The Mongols regrouped and prepared to use their island footholds to precisely strike and break the Japanese defenses, but the Japanese had other plans. During the night, the Japanese launched the first of their night raids on the Mongol fleet. Small boats packed with samurai boarded Mongol ships, killing their crews and passengers before setting them on fire and escaping under the cover of the night. A samurai named Kusano Jiro is credited with leading the first night raid against the Mongols, bringing roughly 21 heads back as evidence of his deeds. The night raids of the 23rd and later the 24th would kill up to 2,000 invaders and burn many ships. The Japanese would continue their attacks the next day. On June 24th, the samurai Kawano Michiari led a dangerous daytime raid with only 2 boats. As they approached a Mongol ship, they faced a hail of arrows. Michiari's uncle, Michitoki, was killed by a well-placed arrow, and Michiari himself was wounded in his left arm and shoulder. Despite the arrow fire, the raiders were committed to the attack. Boarding the ship, Michiari killed a large warrior before aiding his men in lighting the ship ablaze. The remaining raiders returned to Hakata in glory. More daytime raids followed, each with varying degrees of success or failure. These raids made it impossible for the Mongols to start their plan to break down the Japanese defenses, and with nightfall came more night raids. The Japanese were bleeding the invasion dry, night by night, day by day. In the morning of June 25th, the Japanese launched a counterattack along the Umi no Nakamichi, a long, thin stretch of land that connected Chika Island with Kyushu. The battle was fierce, but the terrain deprived the Mongols of their strengths. The Mongols were defeated and forced to retreat to defensive positions around their beachhead. Both sides lost many warriors. The battle for Shikanoshima continued on the 26th as fierce Japanese attacks rattled the Mongols' defenses. In the last engagement on the island, Takizaki Tsunaga participated in and was lightly wounded in the battle. This last engagement forced the Mongols to abandon Chika. Like dominoes, the Mongols retreated from Noko, then Hakata Bay, and finally from Kyushu. The battered eastern force returned to Iki Island to wait for the western force to arrive. The battle for Koan was over, but not the war. Seizing the initiative on July 16th, the Japanese, led by the Matsuura, Rizoji, and Takaji clans, launched an all-out attack on Iki Island. The Japanese gathered roughly 10,000 samurai, warriors, levies, and sailors and sent them on every ship and boat available to the island. The sea battle that ensued copied the previous night and day raids of individual ships and magnified it several-fold. Despite having superior ships, the Mongols could not effectively counter the Japanese's tactics. Returning to the Moko Shirai Ikotaba and its commissioner Takizaki Tsunaga, the second scroll depicts Tsunaga's experience at the Battle of Iki. Having recovered from his wounds, Tsunaga and his retinue joined a boarding action against a Mongol ship. Tsunaga would engage several enemies in close-quarter combat on the ship's top deck. The skill of Tsunaga and his comrades outmatched the invaders. In victory, Tsunaga and co. would cut the heads off their defeated foes before burning the ships and escaping. Soon after this, Tsunaga boarded the ship of Japanese General Adachi Morimune and presented these heads to the general as evidence of his accomplishments. Tsunaga would be bestowed rewards by Morimune and finally gain the glory he sought. After surviving the invasions, Tsunaga would commission these scrolls to further boast his fame and gain more rewards. Eventually, enough of the Mongol fleet was destroyed that an opening was made for a counter-invasion of Iki to occur. On July 18th, the Rizoji clan led the landing on Iki, and by the end of the day, they defeated the Eastern Army. This shocking defeat forced the Eastern force to withdraw from Iki and head west for the island of Harado, which is located west of Kyushu and only separated from Kyushu by a small strait. Iki Island was finally free. Off the coast of Harado, the western force finally united with the battered eastern force. For weeks, the United Invasion Force reorganized itself, rested its troops, took care of the sick and wounded, and prepared for a new assault on Kyushu. By the last days of July, the second Mongol invasion sailed southeast and occupied the island of Takashima to use as a jump-off point to invade Kyushu. Shortly after occupying Takashima, the Mongols invaded Kyushu from the west, near the modern-day city of Sasebo. For 2 weeks, the invasion force advanced deeper and deeper into Kyushu, seeking to take all of northern Kyushu, including Hakata Bay, so that a proper foothold could be established and more of the empire's might could join the conquest. However, these 2 weeks proved to be nothing more than a bitter stalemate for the invaders. Every road, every village and town, every forest and hill that the Mongols encountered or crossed, they would face bitter resistance. Countless skirmishes, ambushes, and raids against the invaders. 2 weeks of bloody countryside fighting. Each step forward was paid in blood. The Japanese's will to fight proved stronger than the Mongols. Slowly but surely, the invaders retreated. Eventually, they were driven back to their beachheads in western Kyushu. On August 12th, the Japanese were able to pinpoint the invaders' fleet and once more launch raid after raid against it. Many raids were successful and many were not, but this forced the Mongols to fasten their ships together with chains and planks of spare wood to counter the raids. The once mighty second Mongol invasion that seemed unstoppable now faced bitter stalemate. That was the case until fate itself intervened. On August 15th, 1281, a great typhoon struck the Mongol fleet with such fury that the Japanese would describe it as a divine wind sent by the kami, the kamikaze. This great typhoon massacred the Mongol fleet. Hundreds of ships were wrecked beyond saving. Many more were sunk, taking their crews and passengers with them, and more were smashed into the shores of Kyushu. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers and sailors were left drifting in the water, desperately clinging on to life. Many more stranded ashore on the invasion's beachheads in Kyushu and Takashima. Upwards of half of the invasion force was lost to this great storm. Those that survived regrouped and used the best ships remaining to escape and sail back to China. Those that were stranded in Japan were rounded up and moved to Hakata. In Hakata, all of the Mongols, the Koreans, and the northern Chinese were massacred. Only the southern Chinese were spared this fate for the sole reason that they were once part of the Song dynasty. Even then, they did not escape punishment, as they would become slaves. Few would gain their freedom. The second Mongol invasion suffered roughly a 75% casualty rate. 3 out of 4 soldiers and sailors that were a part of the invasion were killed. The Japanese, whose numbers of warriors that participated in the defense of the second invasion, which reached roughly 40,000, suffered at the highest a 25% casualty rate. In all, up to 150,000 soldiers and civilians perished during these Mongol invasions of Japan. As the storms of invasion cleared, the second Mongol invasion was over, and with it, the end of the war between the Mongol Empire and the Kamakura Shogunate of Japan. With the war's end at hand, all that remains left is aftermath's embers, as these invasions would have dire consequences for the continued existence of the Mongol Empire's Yuan dynasty and Japan's Kamakura shogunate. These invasions would knock over a set of dominoes that would lead to the end of dynasties. Our path is set for us to soon speak on the aftermath of the invasions. I hope you all enjoyed today's bonus Bookends chapter. I certainly did. Until next time, this is Ghost signing out.